is starting to become a realistic hope. When you are the guide that leads us away from concern only for ourselves, instead to concern for serving others, we know we're moving in the right direction. That perhaps explains the wonderful magic of a group of ordinary and very different people into those who continue to change the world. Whether we have been together 30 or 45 years or only 6 months, a bond is formed that is deep and lasting. Well, Lord, as we move forward into whatever the future holds, help us to find constantly new ways to do old things. Help us to enjoy each other's company. And most of all, help us as a Rotary Club to serve as you would have us serve. This is our prayer today. Amen. Now, the second part of our act of faith today is to pledge allegiance to the flag. You all turn and face the flag, please. Whoops. The flag isn't there. David Hodgkins didn't bring his so that you could wave it for us. So instead, we can still pledge allegiance to the flag and the country in which we live, and to make it as a part of our act of faith too. So please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Always, we appreciate your prayers, John. And now we will move to announcements. If anyone has any announcements, they would let me know. Go ahead. Here we go. We're going to move both these items to you. Okay.
Thank you, Ranjit. I just wanted to announce that we do have another volunteer opportunity at NC MedAssist next Tuesday at the regular time, 9 o'clock. And I have a special ask today because we're only at 3 of our 8 members present. So I really need people to step up if they possibly can. Help us out next Tuesday, 9 o'clock, NC MedAssist. Sign Up Genius is online. If you can do that, it would be a big help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have also got an announcement from one of our incoming members, a new member, Charlotte Garcha, who will be joining the club shortly. She is organizing an interfaith prayer, part of a group that's organizing an interfaith prayer vigil at the Gurdwara. Information now, this is for the Indianapolis FedEx shooting and other gun violence victims. This is May 8th from 6 to 7 p.m. at 5715 University City Boulevard. And I will be getting information out via email to you all about that. Thank you for that. Other than that, we have June 18th, we have our in-person wine tasting at the Canopy Hotel. Tickets are $75 a piece, and we ask that each member be responsible for 2 tickets. And if you have other people you want to invite, please buy more than 2 tickets, but it'll be a really interesting and fun event. Again, June 18th, 6 to 8 at the Canopy Hotel. And we're still looking for items for our silent auction. So if you have any ideas, the silent auction committee will be approaching you about possible items that we can sell to raise money for all our charities. This is our only fundraiser this year. All of us have had 0 expenses other than the lights and the food and no travel expenses. We all should be pretty flush. So let's make sure we raise a lot of money for our charities. They do a lot of good work in the community, and we need to help them in every way we can. Next week, we have the Salvation Army coming to speak to us. Salvation Army, we've been involved with them for many, many years at this point, and it'll be exciting to hear from them. So please make a point of coming to that. And then we have if you look at the Dilworthian, we also show, I think May 21st, is that right? May 20th, somebody to Rotary, bring a friend to Rotary. So please plan on attending that and bring your friend to Rotary. And with that, we will be, any other announcements? Other than that, we will go ahead and get to happy dollars. Is anybody happy? So, Ed, can you have to come up here and tell us why you're happy? I'm sorry, we have one mic for the moment. So, and into it.
Okay. We have to be ambidextrous today. Huh? Is that it? That's a challenge for some of us. I have two things. One thing, I have a grandson, Carson, who is next Sunday from Chapel Hill, and I'm very happy and proud of him. He was a ball team manager all 4 years he was there, which is a real challenge, and so he's a good kid. I'm looking forward to that graduation. The second thing, I have a friend here in Charlotte who's from New York City, and he has a brother there who is a police officer. And a few days ago, his brother was directing traffic around an accident on a highway there in the city, and a drunken woman ran over him and killed him. And was a hit and run driver. They did catch her. And his name is Tassos, and Tassos has a wife and 2 young children. So my friend here has been in New York, and the family is still most. So they've come over from Greece and this past week. Well, it's a really sad thing, but today I learned that there's a foundation that assists first responders, and this foundation has agreed to pay off the mortgage on Tassos and his wife's home. So they will be able to live mortgage free, or she will be able to, and her children will be able to live mortgage free. And they just bought this house a year ago. So, so I'm really happy for that to happen to that family. And so just wanted to share that with you guys. Police officers have a tough life to live out there. It's dangerous all the time. And, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am happy that that this is Jen's first day of eligibility to be out in the community. So we're just happy to be here, and I will make a suitable contribution reflecting that.
Thank you. And anyone else? Yes. Here we go. All right.
Record limit. Yes.
Record limit.
I too am happy to be here and see us getting back to normal. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Getting back to normal, and I don't have anything funny to say, but I'll think of something before the next meeting. And good to see all of you. And Ed, glad to hear you from Carolina. Thank you.
And can you? There we go. Okay. This is going to work at some point, and I'm going to put some happy dollars in because I'm happy that we're all together in person for a change. Oh, sorry, Jim Stump. Let me have Jim Stump first. Jim, if you come to the front of the room.
Take your money, sir.
Native flag. Very happy to read where Kevin is going to be an assistant governor next year in the district. This makes me very, very happy. Jenny, this for some time. You can see she's paying attention. So Kevin, it would be very normal for you, but we're continuing to be very proud of your leadership and also of Jenny as she continues to serve the district in what appears to be an ever-expanding role. You guys are the power team, and we're very grateful for you.
Thank you, Jim. All right. Kelly, could I have you back here? We have a few more dollars for you. And we have $1 for the fact that the technology is working for the moment. We have another $1 for all the money we're going to raise for our project, and then we have another $1 just because. All right. Excellent. And now we are ready. Does anyone have anything else? Great to have you all here. Frank, thank you for today. We're really excited to hear about him. And Ed, if you don't mind introducing the speaker, that'd be great. All right.
I'm going to try to get through this introduction. Frank arranged this program, as you know, and Frank kindly wrote out what he wanted me to read. So I'm sort of infringing on that a little bit to insert a few of my own comments and rearrange it just a little bit. Hopefully Frank will forgive me. But if he won't, I'm going to do it anyway. All right, I'm going to introduce Dr. Julian Pleasance to you. And this excites me because he's a historian of history for many years. And I love history. And I love the, especially American history and things about the South. And I think Julian has written books about those kinds of things. He has a local connection here in that he has his undergraduate degree from Davidson, which should make Ranjit happy. Indeed. And he also has a master's degree and his PhD from Chapel Hill, which makes me happy. Sorry, Bob Lyons, we couldn't work NC State in there anyway. Julian went to the University of Florida in 1969 and joined the history department there and taught there for all of these years. And for a number of years, he was director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Department. And he retired in 2008. Now, Frank, now I'm going to get into what Frank wanted me to read. And I'm going to tell a story about Julian. You do have Julian's permission for this story, don't you, Frank? And anyway, here's what Frank wrote. Julian took 4 years of ROTC at Davidson and was ordained a second lieutenant as far as on graduation. He was assigned to Fort Bragg and there was invited to a dance at the officers club. He and another second lieutenant got dates, went to the dance. They had a very inexperienced bartender, according to Julian, and were seriously overserved. Driving the girls home, they had a head-on collision in the grocery store. All right, there's a qualification. Julian was not driving. Okay. All right, well, that's one of the stories. And the second one has to do with Frank's wife, Grace. This is a little convoluted, so listen carefully here. Julian was offered a position as executive director of the Democratic Party in Georgia, but turned it down to accept a year-long fellowship study in Australia offered by Rotary International. So when he turned that job down, he recommended a long-term friend of Frank to take the job with the Democratic Party. And when the friend assumed this position, he hired a lady by the name of Grace, and then to advise him that he should make the trip to Atlanta to meet Grace. And that apparently worked out well because they got married. And those of us like Hodgkins and Behringer that have been around, probably Filson, have been around a long time, remember Grace. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman and a great influence on Frank, thank goodness. So we have to give Grace a lot of credit. And so with all of that, Julian's going to talk about the German U-boats that frequented the North Carolina coast during World War II. So with that, Julian.
And the very least I could do is order a meat. That seemed pretty simple. So when I was thinking about what I should order, I thought, well, let's do something really simple. How about a hot dog, right? So word for hot, word for dog, hunt. And so I walked into the restaurant, the guy comes up and said, what do you have, sir? And I said, "Möchte gern, I would like eine heiße Hund." And he turned around and walked away with a disgusted look on his face. What I had ordered was a dog in heat. The proper term is Frankfurter. Too dumb to figure that out. So there's a great advantage in traveling abroad and learning other cultures and languages. There are always some problems, right? Now I want to talk about what happened from January to June 1942 off the coast of North Carolina. It's really rather extraordinary because suddenly in January 1942, German submarines were sinking merchant vessels off of Cape Hatteras. This is 38 days after Pearl Harbor. What were German submarines doing in North Carolina? No one, mainly the American Navy, expected such a thing. It was stunning. And what had happened was that the head of the German U-boats, Admiral Dönitz, recognized that the way to win the war was through logistics. If you're having to, you don't have the ammunition, you don't have fuel for your planes and tanks, you don't have food, if you don't have the wherewithal to fight, you can't win the war. So his theory was, let's sink as much merchant vessel shipping as possible to undermine the effort, particularly the effort of sending food and supplies to Great Britain. And he knew that there were no defenses. The American Navy was not anywhere prepared for German U-boats. And what we didn't realize that these U-boats had a range of 6,500 miles. So Dönitz figured out there's about 3,000 miles. He could send over, and they had enough fuel to sink merchant vessels like 7 to 15 days. Then they turn around and go back, and he sent them in groups of 5. And most of them tended to stay off the coast of North Carolina, Cape Hatteras. You know about the waters around Cape Hatteras and Cape Lookout, very treacherous, very difficult sandbars, all of that. And so the merchant vessels would come north and they would sort of get around this choke point. They would come closer to the shore, which meant they came closer to the U-boats. And these U-boats were really extraordinary. I mean, on the surface, they can make 17 knots. That's pretty fast. And underwater, they can make 7 knots. Now, the problem I've never understood is how you manage to get one person to volunteer for submarine. These ships were 200 feet long, 20 feet wide, 45 crew members, 1 toilet. The diesel fuels were horrible. It was like living in an iron coffin. And much of the time, they stayed submerged. They would come during the daytime because you could spot one of these subs on the surface in the daytime, but you couldn't at night. many, but only 200 feet long, 20 feet wide, a huge ocean, you couldn't spot them. So they would lie underneath all day, then at night they would pop up. And most of us would be coming by, and they'd have all the lights on. You could see them coming. Even if they didn't, they would be silhouetted against the lights on the shore. There was one nightclub in Morehead City, had big bright lights, and they would just sit off the coast and they could see the ships coming. And the guy who was the commander said, "This is sitting ducks." He said, "We're like a wolf in the middle of a bunch of sheep. They don't even know we're there. And we can knock them off." It was called the Great Atlantic Turkey Shoot. And around where that area was on Cape Hatteras is known as Torpedo Junction. And the numbers are really pretty amazing when you think about it. They sank some off the East Coast. So 28 merchant vessels, just a 5-month period. Hundreds of thousands of pounds of crucial necessary supplies, ammunition, food, fuel. They were particularly attuned to the oil vessels coming up from Texas, coming up the East Coast, and they would sink them one after the other. I mean, they had, each one of these U-boats had 14 torpedoes. They use up all 14, and then they would go home. And the ships didn't practice any kind of zigzagging or changing speed or cutting the lights down. And the people on the coast didn't practice any kind of light security. And finally, as the mounted and hundreds of people, 5,000 people died on the East Coast of North Carolina during this 5-month period. I mean, it was a serious blow to the American logistical supply chain. It was serious. Finally, they'll do something about it. But it's interesting to get the reaction of the people on Cape Hatteras. Now, remember, these are outliers anyway. I mean, it's separated from the mainland. It's a hardy group of people who live out on the outer islands. And then all of a sudden, they would wake up at night with this huge blast. And the next day, debris would wash up on the shore. And they had no idea what was going on. They thought they were 3,000 miles away from the war, and the war was right next door to them. It was terrifying. They didn't know what to do. And as often happens, these people were sort of cut off anyway. They panicked, as you might well imagine. And suddenly, there were saboteurs everywhere. Any stranger who showed up looked vaguely German. They determined that there were German newspapers left in a theater in Morehead City. There was a woman who was a teacher in Ocracoke High School, had a German last name. They ran her out of town. And the most amazing of these panicked fears, there was a woman who had a dock. She had a German name, and it was determined that she was refueling German submarines from her dock, which was interesting because the dock was in 5 feet of water. Well, hard to imagine German syrups pulling up and filling up. Yeah, it was so irrational that they got frightened and they decided that they had to protect themselves because there was going to be an invasion. And one of the more interesting stories is that one night there was a report of red lights flashing from the beach. to an unseen German submarine. And they thought, my Lord, they're signaling the Germans are going to come in and kill us all. And two intrepid local gendarmes decided they would go investigate. So they get their guns and they go putting down, they come up on a car and the brake lights, red lights are flashing on and off. And they creep up on the car and to their chagrin, they found a young couple in the front seat making love. And in the heat of passion, the kid's foot was hitting the brake light. Therefore signaling the German sub. So it's pretty clear that there was not a grave danger at that particular time. But the people who had to live in that area were still terrified. There was no way to get them to settle down. And by the way, nobody knew about that. All of the sinkings were hushed up. It was not in any of the news, not in any of the press. And they were afraid they'd create a panic, which of course already there. Now, one of the early ships that was sunk was a ship called the Allen Jackson. And unfortunately, it had 72,000 barrels of oil. So when that thing went up, it was an amazing explosion. And one of the little side stories you get from survivors, there was one guy, once the submarine was hit by the torpedo, he remembered that he had $80 in his locker. So he goes back below deck to get the $80, which he got. And unfortunately, the next day, they found $80 in the pocket, made that terrible decision to go back. He just panicked, as they often did, they panicked. But the idea of having to deal with a torpedo, particularly for merchant men, now these were not sailors, these were not trained military personnel, they were logistical types. They loaded the material on the ships, that's what they did, they were not fighters. And one guy described, this is a guy who survived 2 torpedoes, by the way. He said, when you get hit by a torpedo, you hear a thud. Then there's a 3-second silence. Then the explosions, and the ship is engulfed in flames. He woke one morning, this was the second torpedo, and could not understand why his cabin had no water. And he then became what happened. The hissing of escaping steam, the screech of steel plates being violently twisted and torn asunder, and torrents of surging seawater pouring into the sides of the ship. But the greatest fear they all had was the fire. And it was extremely difficult. Once the thing exploded, there was fire everywhere. And it was hard to even swim away from the ship. And so the fear of fire had more than any other fear for the sea. One of the strange events, a ship called the City of New York, there was a woman who was a Serbian immigrant traveling, we're not sure why, with her 2-year-old daughter, and she was 9 months pregnant on the way to New York. Well, the torpedo hit. The boat was sinking. She found herself in the lifeboat. And unfortunately, this is in March. It's cold. For her sake, amazingly, the doctor ended up in the same lifeboat and gave birth to the baby. 8 to 10 foot seas in this rickety lifeboat, and the baby survived. And they were rescued the next day by a ship called the Jesse Roper. And so the baby was named Jesse Roper, and the name is hard for me, Mohawk. Jesse Roper. Interesting, this guy ended up living about 75 years, was in the shipping business. This little baby was the lifeboat baby, the miracle baby. So that was helpful. Now, one of the issues that had really been a long time in coming was how to respond to these U-boats. The Navy was unprepared, but let's be fair. They were fighting the battle in the North Atlantic, most of the destroyers in the North Atlantic. They had 20 ships, 20 naval ships, Coast Guard ships, for 1,500 miles to cover. They didn't have any planes to speak of. They had almost no destroyers. And so they really weren't doing anything. The first thing they did finally was to maintain light control. So as some of you may have heard, in order to maintain this end of the cylinder, they had to create a very strict regimen of enforcing blackouts. So you cut all your outside lights off, all your automobile lights, they had a shroud over that. Everybody had something to do with blackout curtains or something. They had to cut out the lights. Once they did that, that helped because those merchant ships were silhouetted very well. But what they didn't do is they really didn't create a very effective system of getting the merchant ships through this little blockade by the U-boats. What they should have done, and they finally did, was a convoy system. So the convoy system existed, they changed their speed, and they were 20, 25 merchant vessels surrounded by 5 destroyers. Once they did that, it was much more effective. But what also they did, and then some of this sounds a little strange, but it's all right. The Coast Guard, fearful of saboteurs, had Coast Guardsmen riding horses up and down the beaches, waiting for saboteurs to report them. Of course, there were never any who showed up. Secondly, and I've never quite figured this one out, but they had something called the Coast Guard Picket Patrol. They got civilian sailors to bring their personal ships to go out and patrol for submarines. And so they would take, if somebody had a regular ship, they would make sure that they had flares, make sure they had some weapons, make sure they were able to detect these ships. And they were called, in retrospect, the Hooligan Navy. The group included amateur admirals, professors, college students, business people, deep sea charter operators, bootleggers, anyone who could steer and handle a boat. They had something like 70 of these boats out patrolling. And of course, it was a complete total waste of time. They really couldn't do anything. What would you do about a submarine if you drive in a cruise craft? You know, I mean, it's just, and the big mistake they made, I don't know where this came from. They decided they give these pleasure boats depth charges. We're talking 300 pound depth charges. You could barely get one of these guys. They told them very strict, should never be dropped in water less than 100 feet, and should never be set for less than 50 feet. And when you dropped it, you only maintain the speed of at least 10 knots. So some of these guys were coming in there, dropping the depth chart and checking out to see what was going to happen, because it blew them out of the water. And so eventually they decided that was not a good idea, and they came and got all of those. And then they had the Civil Air Patrol, and these again volunteer pilots. They would get their own planes at their own expense, and they would fly over and people look out for submarine. You never saw any of them because in the daytime submarines stayed underwater. And then finally, and I had not known about this, I was stunned to find this out. They set up a blimp base near Elizabeth City. And so they flew the blimps over, which was a great idea because they could stay over one area for a longer time. They didn't make any noise. The subs couldn't hear them coming. But the downside is they never really saw anything. You know, it was a nice effort, but it didn't really work. Finally, by June of 42, mainly through the convoy system, but also the Navy had got some destroyers in there. They've got better ships, they've got better support. They were able to stop the U-boats. And by that month, only one merchant vessel was sunk. And at that point, Dönitz realized that the little venture was over, and he recalled all of the U-boats back to Germany. But they had done incalculable damage those 5 months. And it was a desperate time, particularly for Great Britain, and they needed those supplies desperately. So it was an important thing that they were able to control the problem of the U-boats. They only sank one U-boat. At the only time, one destroyer finally sank one, and they captured the crew, and they were the first POWs in America from the German subs. Now, one little incident I wanted to give you is there was a case where the British government, worried about getting their supplies, decided to help out the Americans, and they sent some anti-submarine corvettes. And a corvette's about half the size of a destroyer, not quite as effective, but healthy. So they sent a bunch of corvettes to patrol the waters off of North Carolina. And the Bedfordshire, just on one trip, disappeared. Nobody ever knew what happened to it until many years after the war. They finally discovered the sunken ship. And it was, of course, brought down by German U-boats. And the issue becomes for the Americans when 2 of the British sailors from that ship washed up on shore. And they were not sure what to do. These were British sailors sunk by German subs. So what they decided they would do is give them a military funeral, solemn, respectful, honoring 2 brave men from another country who had come to protect American lives and property. And then 2 more bodies washed up, 2 more British ships. So they decided to bury all 4, and they put out white crosses and a little sign and gave them a final farewell. They played taps for them and that sort of thing. And eventually this small burial plot was turned over to Great Britain. And it is now an official British cemetery on North Carolina soil. It's still there, you can still see that. And it was a good example of how the interaction between the British and the Americans was such an important part of winning this war. So what we find here is by June of 42, things had returned somewhat to normal. At least they were not blowing up any more ships. The war was far from over, but the Americans learned a tremendously important advantage with the U-boats. They learned that they could not win this war unless they cooperated with the British, worked with each other, got support from local military groups and police forces. Everybody had to work together to make sure that they could win this war. So it's a strange and unusual circumstance in North Carolina history that very few people know about. But I always find it very intriguing to all of a sudden wake up one day and you got a German submarine in your backyard. Thank you.
Let's take a few questions. If anyone has some questions, we're going to go ahead and yeah. 1 second. Let's see, how do we do that? There we go. All right, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. That was very interesting. I love the part about the depth charges coming off the boats. It's a good way to go fishing, I guess. I do have just a quick question for you, not so much about this topic, but have you read a book called Dark Invasion by Howard Bloom? It's a wonderful book. I would highly recommend it, but it talks about how the Germans interacted and fought against the United States in the years leading up to our entry into World War I, and how they engaged in sabotage then. They employed a lot of people who were anti-English at the time who worked on the docks to actually plant bombs and things in some of the cargo ships that were bound for England. And they primarily targeted Irish and Black. So thank you. Thank you.
There were two groups of German saboteurs who did come to the United States. One in Long Island, one in Poland. They caught them all and executed all of them immediately. And those are the only two known saboteurs to actually land in the United States. But I'm sure there might have been some in various industrial sites and things like that, spies and things like that. But these were groups of saboteurs, and they were beat. I mean, they barely hit the trophies, they just proved that. That's right, yeah. That's what happened in the Congo.
Excellent. Any other questions? Excellent. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. There we go. All right. You getting any audio? Kelly, you are? Okay. You are getting some audio? Okay. Well, thank you, Frank, for organizing that, as always. Very, very interesting. Thank you, sir, for being here. We will be getting you a Rotary mug shortly. I'll just have to track one, maybe underneath the seat. So, but thank you all for putting up with our technical difficulties. Appreciate your being patient. Thank you for our online audience for joining us in this first Zoom meeting. And with that, we will take a recite forward test. So, first, second, concern. Third, will it be goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, will it be fun? All right, excellent. With that, the meeting is dismissed. Thank you all for being here and have a great rest of the weekend. Oh, sorry, we have a half an hour, we have a drawing. We get a couple of tickets.